Welcome to the Weekly Sceptic, episode 72. I'm Nick Dixon here with Britain's answer to Ben Shapiro, Toby Young. Coming up, the Rwanda bill runs into choppy waters in the House of Lords. Starmer gaslights us on the culture wars. And Ron DeSantis is out of the race, plus loads more. And of course, peak woke. But Toby, we've got to announce our new website has just launched, basemedia.org. We're doing this on video. There's so many changes. You're in the shed, but it looks like you're not because you've put a white background up. Everything's new. Any comments?
Yeah, a bit of a few announcements to make. I guess the first one is that basemedia.org, our new podcasting and events platform, is now live. So go to basemedia.org and check it out. This is the first episode, I think, or perhaps the second episode of the Weekly Sceptic we're recording, in which there will be a premium section at the end. If you want to hear some uncensored content, if you want to hear review of reviews, and if you want us to answer your queries, you have to become a premium subscriber, which you can do at basemedia.org. Premium subscription starts for as little as £5 a month, and there are other perks too. Just go check out the different tiers, what you get for them, and in due course, that premium subscription will get you access to premium content in other videos. The idea is we're going to include other videos on our podcasting platform as well. It's going to become the Gauleiter Productions of the centre right is the dream, which is why he described me as the Ben Shapiro, let's say the Daily Wire of the British Daily Wire, perhaps better than making me the kind of centre-right Gary Lineker. Anyway, so there's
when
that.
you said other videos, you mean other shows. We'll have other podcasts completely on there, is what you meant.
Yeah.
And that's the idea. We're starting with the Weekly Sceptic. We'll branch out. And there was one other thing you said that I wanted to pick up on, but I can't remember what it was. But anyway, they get extra perks. They get a monthly Zoom call. There's one tier where they get a monthly Zoom call with you and me. Imagine that. There's even a tier where they get to have a meal with us. And there's another tier where they get to have a tour of your shed, an intimate tour. I've just made that one up now. We could add that, though, for about £1,000 a month. We could add... What would be the price for Toby's shed? I don't know. It'd have to be a lot.
I think, yeah. And for half that, you could visit Nick's bedsit in Crouch End.
Bedsit? How dare you? 2 bedrooms, bathrooms.
Two-bedroom flat.
You get to live in my second bathroom for a certain
And we should
price.
say, another new development is that we've launched our YouTube channel. So you can now not just listen to this podcast, you can watch it over on our YouTube channel. So go to YouTube, search for The Weekly Sceptic. You should be able to find that. And
I didn't even know that was launched, so that's exciting.
Yeah, there'll be a free version, which will be the same content as the free version of the audio podcast, but there'll also be a premium version of the video on basemedia.org. So if you pay your £5 a month or more, you'll be able to access the premium video version as well, ad-free as well. And one last thing, Nick, is we should let people know that they can now purchase tickets to our next live show. So the next live recording of the Weekly Sceptic is at the Hippodrome on February the 12th, and tickets are on sale. If you go to Base Media, click on events, basemedia.org, click on events, you'll be able to purchase tickets for that show. Cheap as chips, only £25. Where else can you find a 2-hour show in the West End, in the heart of the West End, for a mere £25? It's a steal. But also, if you want to hang out with me and Nick afterwards, have a drink on the Hippodrome's exclusive rooftop bar, and it really is exclusive, you can pay £75, get to see the show, and come and hang out with me and Nick for a couple of hours afterwards.
I saw one trolling you saying that was a scam. And I thought, that's such a weird thing to say. It's a live show. People can listen to the previous one. It's one of the best live shows around. It's absolutely hilarious. It's a 2-hour show. It's a lot of work. Very entertaining. Very informative. It's a brilliant show. And I was thinking, what is a scam about that? We're at such a ridiculous point with the internet where people think charging money for tickets in the West End for a 2-hour show is a scam. There's nothing that's a scam about it. It's right there on the tin. It's it is what it is.
Yeah,
Is Hamilton a scam?
The accusation grifter is thrown around a little too loosely, isn't it? If you try and make any money, if you try and monetize your content in any way, if you don't just give it away, you're a grifter, basically.
Yeah, we've done this podcast for a year for free, over a year for free. We've done 70 odd episodes. We've done, it's this insane amount of stuff we've done for free. I mean, when I think about it, I actually get kind of annoyed the amount I've done for free. But we've done so much for free. Then it's come to a live show, pay £20. scam. It's like, obviously this guy was just some degenerate troll, but people say stuff like that all the time.
They do,
They
yeah.
especially on your other show, that lockdown thing. But I mean, that was a scam, to be fair. All right. So the absolutely basemedia.org live show February 12th. That's the plugging out of the way. We will do more plugging at the very end. You know how it works. But we better get into the topics, Toby, before I get shouted at. Better not talk about my health. Better not talk about my life in any way. I better just be a robot pumping out topics for the non-paying free. But you can always tell who the non-paying people are because they always have annoying complaints. The paid people are always much cooler. That's my view.
Yeah, in the premium version, we've cut out Nick talking about his health completely. You need to pay an extra £5 a month in order to cut that
to
out.
not hear that. Yeah, fair enough. And the people now get to see me live producing on video. They get to get a sense of how much I do. I run all the software. I just do everything. I do all the topics. They'll get a great sense of how much I do, which is important to me. But first, we should start with the Rwanda bill, I think, Toby, which you understand more than me because it just broke last night. I was on GB News on headliners, and we didn't even break in the papers. It wasn't even on the front pages. So I didn't, and I've been trying to catch up with it. And I've got the basic idea. So the peers voted by 214 to 171 to not ratify the agreement. It's thought to be the first time the Lords has voted against the ratification of a treaty. This is from Sly News, aka Sky News. House of Lords has defied Sunak to vote against it. So we saw that Sunak did this sort of strange press conference about not frustrating the will of the people. And there was a sort of weird threat to the House of Lords, but people weren't sure what the threat really meant. Did it mean that he would go into an election on a kind of anti-House of Lords reform ticket, or that he had that in his back pocket, or did it just kind of mean nothing? Anyway, they didn't care because they've not ratified it, and they've just it kind of annoys me that they've done that because it's we've been so painful getting this bill through. It's just a slight attempt to tackle immigration. It's like no, we won't put it through. I'm like, is that what the House of Lords is for? I guess it is what it's for. But do we want that? What do you think, Toby?
Yeah, well, you're thinking about it. What did Rishi mean? I mean, as you say, he didn't spell it out, but maybe what he meant was that if the House of Lords don't rubber stamp my Rwanda bill, I'll flood the House of Lords with, dozens of newly created Tory peers. So obviously, my hopes shot up at that point, Nick. But what the House of Lords did, I think it was last night. It's an advisory vote. It's not binding. So they've said they would like the government to delay sending any illegal migrants to Rwanda until assurances have been put in place that their system for processing asylum applications is better. I think they're supposedly concerned. It was a motion, I think, proposed by Lord Goldsmith, former Labour Attorney General, and he's concerned that some genuine asylum applications won't be processed properly in Rwanda. Wants assurances. It's basically just a way of delaying the bill, but it's not mandatory. It's not binding. It's just advisory at this point. So, as Rishi has said today, it won't mean a delay in any flights taking off this spring, if indeed any ever do. But I do think the House of Lords have got some other delaying tactics up their sleeves. So this isn't the last we'll have heard from them, and some kind of showdown between the Commons and the Lords may yet happen.
It must be tough for you, Toby, watching the news through the lens of will I become a Lord? Like everything's like, it's like you've got a bet on the football. And everything's just like, I need Spain to score in the 89th minute. You just need a certain set of circumstances to fall into place for you to enter the House of Lords.
It's like a really complicated accumulator bet. The chances of it coming in are vanishing to zero. So believe me, I don't entertain any realistic hopes of ever being put in the Lords.
At one point, it did look fairly possible, didn't it?
Well, I think if I hadn't been cancelled in 2018, and if the events archaeologists hadn't dug up all this kind of dirt to tip on my head, then I might have had a shot. If I'd have kind of become a kind of great member of the great and the good, the educational establishment, schools continued to thrive. Maybe it's possible. But the fact is, I don't think I would now pass the vetting process because of all this dirt that was dug up on me.
I'm sure some of those Lords have done worse than a few tweets about boobs in the 10 years ago. I think they're being hypocrites not letting you in, Toby. It's kind of disgraceful. And you've got a long lineage. Most of your family have been Lords, so it's really shameful. They should put you in on some sort of ancient night ritual. You sort of a long line. It's some Arthurian thing. You have a birthright, Toby, to be a lord. That's what I say.
Well, have I mentioned this before? But I recall Caroline saying at quite an early stage in our marriage, when she refused to take my name but retained her maiden name, that the only circumstances in which she'd change her name is if I was made a lord, and she would then become Lady Young if she wanted to use my name. She now absolutely adamantly denies ever having said that, and I was quite encouraged by that. I think, oh well, she must think it's at least possible now. Um, but I think, in fairness, she probably never did say that, and I've imagined it.
I can easily imagine you imagining that. I mean, but I have to say to her, I didn't realize she retained her own name. Of course, your wife's amazing, but you are a sort of a bit of a name cuck there. I mean, how do you expect to run any kind of patriarchy in your home when your wife's retaining a name like some sort of feminist? Like, it's a bit feminist, isn't it?
Yeah, I think
Maybe I shouldn't attack your personal life
I've
on our first videos. This should be the paid content.
I've made my peace with it, Nick. I'm not gonna die in a ditch over it. And her brother, he married someone who didn't just refuse to take his name, but insisted on calling their children by both of their names. So their children now have double-barreled names. At least Caroline hasn't gone that far.
This is how society collapses. But I won't judge your family. But I sort of have there. But it's more of a larger societal point. And what do you think about Lee Anderson resigning? So he resigned just after we recorded our last episode. Seemed a big deal last Tuesday, but the world is very fast these days. And this Tuesday, it seems kind of not a big deal. It seems kind of like he went too soon. A bit like when Jacob Rees-Mogg and Steve Barclay, not Steve Barclay, who's Steve Baker, stood outside and said they were going to take out Theresa May, and it was a little bit too soon, and it didn't actually work. I was wondering if it was like that. Lee Anderson went, Brendan went as well. Clark Smith is that his name?
Yeah.
I suddenly forgot his name for a second. Good guy, and they both went, and I thought, something's going to happen here soon. That's going to topple. They're all going to go the Tory right, but nothing really happened. And did they just go too soon, or was it for personal
Yeah.
reasons? Was it just integrity?
Well, it could be that Rishi Sunak said that if you're going to put your name to these amendments to my bill, which I'm very opposed to, then I don't see how you can remain as vice chairs of the Conservative Party. So they had no choice but to resign, because if they hadn't resigned, they would have been sacked. That's possible. But it does feel like it was part of a botched coup, that the coup never gathered any sort of momentum. And that was a moment of maximum vulnerability for Rishi, and he seems to have survived it. So now I think the chances of him being replaced by Kemi before the next general election are beginning to recede. I dare say the plotters have got some other tricks up their sleeve, and there'll be more obstacles that Rishi has to navigate if he's going to stay in post. But it feels to me now as though he will be the leader of the party, leading us into the next general election.
Yeah, and I said last time that was how it felt to me as well. I couldn't quite see this happening, and I thought he'd get to the election, then lose, and then have to step down, but not before. Yeah, and it's almost a moot point, there, isn't it? About whether it was about they didn't go along with the bill. You're sort of saying at that point they had to go, but isn't that the point in itself? He says to them, "You have to back this bill." Once they don't back it, yet they're going to go. But the choice not to back it is the choice to go. They're the same thing.
Yeah.
Because Rees-Mogg was saying, we tried to. He was sort of people was grilling him and saying he kind of blocked this or something. He's going, no, I voted for the amendments when they couldn't go through. Then the best possible thing was the bill, and then I voted with the government. So he was kind of saying that that's not voting against the government, that's voting with the government. But you're just trying to encourage them to have a better bill. Is sort of how he was phrasing it. So I suppose ultimately that's you play the game and play ball if you're a kind of hardcore party member. But it's interesting.
Yes.
Lee Anderson's not. Will he go to reform? I had my friend Rory, who's sometimes on my other podcast, was predicting Suella could go to reform. Do you see any Tories defecting to reform?
It's possible. And Richard Tice said, I think a couple of days ago, that he was in conversation with at least one Tory MP about defecting to reform. So it's entirely possible that one or more may defect in the same way that some MPs defected to UKIP. Was it one or two? I think it was two, wasn't it? Douglas Carswell
Carswell.
and another. So it's possible, but I can't see a flood defecting before the general election. There's been a lot. I mean, you would expect at some point the kind of Tory loyalty instinct will kick in, and they'll rally around the leader and make the best fist of it they can. Particularly if a couple of planes do actually take off and carry some asylum seekers to Rwanda. That'll be, Rishi's chosen that as the hill to die on. So his fate in many ways rests on whether any of those planes are going to take off. And if at least one takes off, that'll be now a huge victory for him. On the other hand, if none take off between now and the general election, that'll be thrown in his face and be very difficult for him to deal with.
It's like you waiting to see if you're going to get into the House of Lords. You're just watching those planes. Like, my whole fate depends on whether this takes off or not. And then there's an issue. It's like, it was just engine failure. It is going. That must be a nightmare.
Did you see there was a kind of passengers on a plane prevented a plane taking off to deport a criminal who was an illegal migrant, and the passengers kind of revolted, and in the end he wasn't deported, and it turns out he was involved in a gun battle on the street in Birmingham. He was a drug runner. He might have even been involved in people trafficking. A thoroughly unsavory character, and yet these kind of Guardian reading liberals had kind of staged a protest on the plane to save this guy from being deported. It's extraordinary.
I remember that.
I suppose that might happen again.
I remember it really annoying me. I don't remember all the details, but in Sweden or going to Sweden or something like that. Was it not it? I remember it though.
Wasn't it Jamaica? I don't know.
I just remember it being very, very annoying and pathetic. Yeah, and the other thing you said that was funny to me there is you said, I know Tice is speaking to at least one. I thought it was going to be more. When you say at least, I was thinking like 12, 6, at least one. That's just one, isn't it? When you say at least one, you mean one guy.
I think I do mean one. The way it was sort of the way Richard phrased it seemed to kind of conjure up at least half a dozen. But when you actually looked at the words, he'd obviously chosen them quite carefully, and he'd probably, I think, only talking to one. So we'll see. Could, I suppose, be Andrew Bridgen. I don't know if he specified it was a Tory MP he was talking to. It could be Andrew Bridgen, having left Reclaim, is now homeless and looking for a party to join. So it could be him, but who knows?
Yeah, and when he did say that Lee Anderson and Brendan Clark-Smith were both welcome to join, he said that publicly. Yeah, reform could be massive. They're on the verge. If they take the chance, if it basically all comes down to if Farage comes back, they could crush the Tories. It could be huge. But if he doesn't, I don't know. Tories could hang on. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think I sympathise with reform, and in some ways feel more closely aligned with their policies than I do with those of the current Conservative government. But the argument that a vote for reform is just a vote for Labour feels pretty persuasive. If you're right, if Farage comes back, takes over the leadership from Richard Tice, and then reform showing in the general election, I imagine will be pretty strong, maybe up between 15 and 20%. But that will destroy the Tories and enable Labour to win an even bigger majority and make it even more likely that Labour will be a two-term at least government. So, even though I don't particularly like the current Conservative government, I would like far less a Starmer-led Labour government. So for that reason, feel reluctant to vote for reform.
And for those reasons, I'm out, as Mark Cuban used to say on Shark Tank. It all depends on your constituency and your seat, doesn't it? Where I am, it's going to be just a disgustingly large Labour victory anyway, as it always is, even in normal times, let alone Labour landslide times. So they're going to win by some appalling margin. So I can just vote for whoever. So I'd probably vote reform as a protest against the Tories, just to register my message that they've been shit. What I otherwise do and have done in the past is just vote on principle, and I voted for the Christian People's Alliance. They got about 200 votes, Labour about 80,000. So it's sort of a kind of a protest vote. So it doesn't matter at all, does it? Does it matter in your area?
No, I think it's Rupa Huck Connie Huck's sister. She's the sitting Labour MP, and she's just going to increase her majority. And if people vote for Reform instead of Tory, then her majority will be even larger. But there's no stopping her, I don't think.
We're both in we're just in this Labour strongholds in broken, fallen London, aren't we? Really?
Yeah.
Maybe we should set up somewhere else in some little village somewhere and have a Weekly Sceptic compound and just weapons.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Tinned food, and in our own set up our own party.
I see. I thought you were going to make a more a more wholesome suggestion, which is we move to a marginal constituency, which is winnable. Either for Reform or for the Tories.
2 votes.
No, but we then campaign. And we encourage like-minded people, to move to this little kind of compound too, and we end up winning the seat for either the Tories or for Nigel Farage. So no, I didn't think of it as sort of a behind barbed wire with kind of armed guards, like Waco.
Yeah, I was thinking of it more as getting out of fallen London. I was saying Labour win in London. London's broken. My mind went to get out, flee to the villages, get your guns. It has to be shotguns in this country. You could get a license. People like you and me, reputable people, we get our shotguns, set up a bunker.
we probably couldn't get a license if anyone listens to this podcast.
The guns are just for self-defense. I mean, shooting. I mean, what you allow for shooting grouse. I meant in self-defense. Any aggressive grouse come down, or hawks. You get hawks sometimes. Wolves. They want to rewild the countryside. So we're going to need these guns. They're going to have wild boars and bears and lions, tigers. Once Labour take up, in my vision, Labour have taken over the country. They've rewilded everything. Everyone's half of us are in prison for saying for something like women exist, and then the rest of us are in the country fending off bears that have been reintroduced by Starmer. I've reintroduced bears. Everyone else is in prison. Day one. I didn't want to say, well, in the election lead up, I've reintroduced sticking plaster politics. Has gone too far. We've reintroduced wolves. I don't know. I think it's going to be so apocalyptically bad. Yeah. Don't you think? When he gets in, everyone in prison.
Yeah. No. Do you think that actually he's a Pabloite, right? So that's a kind of, and that's a kind of strand of Trotskyism.
Correct. I said that last night on the telly. Not many people know that. Just me and Peter Hitchens and you.
Okay. So I saw you last night on Headmistress. That's how I know.
Copying my information, feeding it back into the podcast in a kind of weird Ouroboros of political knowledge. Okay.
But do you think it's possible that when he kind of strolls into Downing Street with his kind of 180 seat majority, the mask will be ripped aside, and suddenly we'll have kind of Lenin in number 10.
Yeah, it's actually Corbyn.
Unbelievably.
It's been Corbyn all along.
He whips the mask away and it's Corbyn, yeah. Or he immediately makes Corbyn Deputy Prime Minister and says, I'll be handing over control in most areas to Corbyn. He's going to be my cultural minister, minister of sport, minister of foreign affairs, minister of defence. I'll be looking after education or, the environment.
Yeah, and by the way, I do hate Jews. Like, it was all, the anti-Semitism thing was all up front. He's a far lefty anti-Semite. He rips off the mask, and it's just the worst nightmare. Yeah, I mean, look, I don't want to make light of the Jewish thing. I know it's a serious issue, but I do think Starmer will come in and be horrendous. I do think it's going to be so bad. I thought last night, suddenly, I was thinking after the episode we did at GB News, I suddenly thought, I bet people are going to go to prison. I bet we're going to see under Labour the first person to go to prison for something really ridiculous. I mean, we've had all sorts of ridiculous hate crimes and non-crime hate incidents. I just think someone goes to prison for misgendering, you know what I mean? And it just is a new level of, like you say, sort of Leninist, Stalinist tyranny.
I think it'll be kind of, the tension will be between, on the one hand, Starmer having all these authoritarian impulses and trying to enact these draconian policies, such as making it a criminal offence to misgender a trans person, which Annalisa Dodds has already said Labour will do when it gets elected. It'll be a conflict between that and just sheer incompetence. So it'll be kind of anarcho-totalitarianism writ large. So they'll try and be these kind of mean, iron-fisted dictators, but they'll get stuff wrong all the time. It'll be like being kind of governed by the Keystone Cops, by kind of a really aggressive authoritarian group of Keystone Cops.
Yeah. And weirdly, they'll be like Thatcherite. Rachel Reeves says, we want to lower tax, we want to be the party of growth. Thatcherite, market libertarian growth party that's imprisoning people for misgendering on the site. It was like that'd be such a weird combo. Can you imagine that? A free market party that sticks you in jail for saying that a man is not a woman. That would be mental, but it seems quite possible.
Yeah, entirely possible. Yeah.
And I didn't want to accidentally sort of, quite unprofessionally for me, get into the next story, sort of sidle into it backwards. But that's what I've done, because actually our second story was going to be this headline from the Daily Mail today: Starmer wades into culture wars on the side of woke. And it was in a lot of papers. I've got a story from the Express here as well. And he basically did his ridiculous speech, which was accused of being vacuous, where he attacked Tory culture wars. And he made some really strange, really disturbing statements in it. Starmer, this is, of course. He said the government got themselves so tangled up in culture wars of their own making that it helped demonize the RNLI, the lifeboats, and the National Trust. Instead of working with the National Trust so more people can learn about and celebrate our culture and history, they've managed to demean their work. So it's this bizarre claim that the Tories have got themselves tangled up in culture wars of their own making, which of course is so wrong. What the Tories have really done is, at the very last moment, made token efforts to address the culture war because Rishi's been told it's an election issue, after just over a decade of allowing us to live in this silent stealth revolution. What Starmer's doing is as if we've had the Bolshevik Russian Revolution, and he's there going, "What? Who's learning?" Like, it's like pure gaslighting. You're doing the culture wars. You kneeled, Starmer, for BLM. You know, someone sent me a list of things they've done. You went on about white men and women, and Emily Thornby criticized people for having an England flag, and like they just engage in the culture wars at all times. I mean, getting rid of people or making it impossible for people like Rosie Duffield. I mean, who is engaged in the culture wars if not Labour? It's absolute nonsense. They impose this stuff on you, and then you say, "I don't like that. I don't like your boot on my face." Oh, why are you in culture? Why are you in a boot on the face issue of your own making? It's like, no, I think it's if you're making. No, it's a cheek issue that you've made. No, it's the boot, definitely. And it's just like, it makes me so angry. And this is what Labour are going to be like. And then I have some follow-up points, but any comment on that first?
Yeah, it's just gaslighting 101, isn't it? It's almost like, Russia invades Ukraine. Ukraine put up some resistance, and suddenly Russia brands Ukraine the aggressor. It's a bit like that, isn't it? I mean, the idea that the culture wars are a figment of the Tory imagination, dreamt up by Telegraph readers trying to whip their, core readership into a Telegraph writers trying to whip their readership into a frenzy. These aren't invented out of whole cloth, these culture wars. I mean, the National Trust, which he mentioned, they now include these kind of, apologias on virtually every painting, every sculpture on National Trust properties. If a house has the faintest connection with the slave trade, that'll be kind of foregrounded by the National Trust. They didn't include, I don't think, any reference to Christmas in the calendars they were selling at Christmas in National Trust properties. I mean, it couldn't be a more captured organization. It's an organization that's supposed to be, preserving and celebrating our history and our heritage. Couldn't be more captured by people who loathe and detest everything about Britain and just want to spend their entire time apologizing for our historical sins. And the idea that objecting to that is kind of conjuring up a culture war where there's nothing to see here, it's just completely ridiculous. It's like, as you say, they've been engaging in this kind of cultural transformation of Britain since 97 and before. And the Tories have finally kind of girded themselves to respond in a fairly kind of weak way. And suddenly, by pushing back just the tiniest bit, the Tories are guilty of whipping up culture wars. It's gaslighting.
Yeah, and someone sent me this good tweet about it, about how actually Labour have been doing it the whole time. And here's a picture, I don't know if our viewers can maybe see, of Starmer holding up a picture of a Black Lives Matter fist for some reason. And we know he also kneeled That's Emily Thornberry saying image from Rochester with England flags. I can't really remember what that was all about, but it's something anti having an England flag. David Lammy, the world does not need any more white saviors. Some lame thing about that. And then he put up this thing. Remember that Labour? Someone compiled Labour winning women's votes, which was all them saying. Thornberry saying it's factually inaccurate to say only women have cervixes, or Starmer saying in the phrase only women have a cervix is something that shouldn't be said. It's not right. And then just all of them just saying loads of rubbish about that. So yeah, they've been absolutely knee deep in the culture war. Go on.
Yeah, and he's struggled to bring himself to say that only men can have penises, and I think he's still going to struggle to answer the "what is a woman" question during the general election. I'm sure there'll be some choice moments during the general election campaign in which he struggles to answer that question. I mean, the Labour Party has a candidate in the form of Eddie Izzard, who campaigns in
Susie.
high heels and a dress. I mean, and the Tories are the one engaging in culture wars. I mean, it's just preposterous.
You mean Susie is she's not taken the male name, kind of like your wife, Toby. She hasn't fully dropped or it's kind of like that person did with the kids. Susie Eddie Izzard is what she, beautiful woman, wants to be called. And for our listeners, I'm joking, and I think it's a he.
It's funny on this show. On this show, it's like the opposite. And if you saw that it's like the opposite of being a member of staff at a woke university or in the Department of Health. Like if we don't misgender a trans person, we get in trouble.
Get blasted. Yeah, I know. And but Eddie
we could lose our jobs.
And then we have to say it's satire. We end up like Alex Jones because he got sued so many times. Going, that's satire. In case anyone clips that out, it's satire. It's comic effect. Like we have to you just say it. It ruins it every time. I'm joking. I'm being
but the problem
satirical.
is it's not enough to say it afterwards because people can clip that bit off. We need like something that comes up on the screen saying satire, satire,
satirical content. Yeah. So the point is, I know Eddie's a man, but he wants to be called Susie Eddie Izzard. It's kind of like keeping both double-barrel names, isn't it? And yeah, absolutely. But he can't win anyway. He keeps losing. But maybe he should go back to being a man. He might be more competent. Am I right? Is this on? He could win some more seats if he was a man. Hey, feminist. Sorry, got carried away. So one question, though, Toby, is Starmer, in issuing this strange statement, what is the tactic? Because is he banking on culture wars, so-called, not being an election issue? And is he banking on... But it seems to me, right, the people who think that, when he talks like that, he reminds me of my football team, God bless them, and the extended blob, as I call them in North London, which just means, people in all kinds of BBC, civil service, but also financial institutions, think tanks, blah, 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 blah. And they all seem to say that. They sort of keep the culture war at a distance, and if you do mention it, they kind of say, I'm not sure why everyone's so bothered about that or why they're getting worked up. They would sort of pretend it's not an issue. That seems to me his voting base that he already has, those people. So why say this? Surely he needs to get the red wall and the social conservatives back.
I've got a theory. So I don't know if you spotted this, but the Labour Party lost a council by-election in Hackney. I don't think we talked about that last week, did we? I can't remember. But anyway, the reason they lost, which is a remarkable result in the People's Republic of Hackney, where the sitting MP is Diane Abbott, but they lost because Labour had sacked the sitting councillor. They'd suspended her, and that was why the by-election had been called, for saying she didn't think trans women were women. So Labour, I think, are acutely aware, Starmer is acutely aware that this is a potential Achilles heel for the party. They're going to lose votes on that issue, particularly in the red wall, as you say, the seats they need to win back if they're going to form the next government. So maybe he's trying to frighten the Tories off going there. He doesn't want the Tories to lean into the culture war because he recognises that if the election is fought on that turf, he's going to do far less well than if he fights it on economy, cost of living, NHS.
That's interesting. But couldn't you just as easily argue that by raising it, you encourage a rebuttal on it immediately, and you encourage them to double down on it, and thus bring up the culture war? You think it scares them off talking about it? Does that
think
work?
A little bit. I think you get the impression that Rishi is a bit wobbly on the issue and hasn't quite made up his mind. Sometimes he just talks about the war on woke, and the next breath he's not talking about it at all.
Here's my theory. It's slightly less sophisticated, but I've just come up with it. Starmer's just saying everything. So if you listen to Starmer, he'll say everything at one time or another. So there'll be a quote there he can go to. So in future, when he's in, one, he can say, if you look, I said it quite clearly there. He can say that he'd said it, but also it just gets him all possible voters. He just says, yeah, I think women are real and they're not real. And we need to fight the culture war and not fight. He seems to have just said basically every position on everything. Even the green thing. Are you really going to spend 24 billion, whatever it was, on green stuff? And he's like, well, no, not if that's what you mean. But yes, we are, but not. Yet he said yes and no to everything.
I think that's true. I think he's very slippery, very hard to pin down. Has often taken completely contradictory positions. I mean, his position on Jeremy Corbyn is pretty inconsistent. Not so long ago, he was a loyal servant in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet, campaigning for Jeremy Corbyn to become our next prime minister. And then when he becomes leader, he effectively expels Corbyn from the party, completely changed his mind about him, apparently. And I do think that the fact that it's difficult to pin him down on any issues, and the fact that no one really knows what he stands for, the fact that we can joke about he used to be a Trotskyist. Is he still a Trotskyist? We don't really know. I think that's a weakness, and I think the Tories could capitalise on that. I think that would be an effective attack line. Slippery Corbyn. Can you think of a name for him? That would
like a Trump-esque name.
Yeah.
Slippery Starmer. Yeah. Boring Keith. Yeah, there's so many names. Yeah, what would Trump do? It would. Yeah, sort of. Yeah. What that captures is lack of non-committal Keith. No, we need like is that what you mean, like a Trump style nickname to take down Starmer?
Trump style nickname.
I need a better one. Listeners can suggest them. I was just thinking about his whole job is to not drop the Ming vase, as Peter Hitchens has said. But if you're too slippery, you eventually do drop the vase, Toby. To continue that metaphor. But what would that's I think what Trump would call
slippery Starmer.
It's not a bad start, is it? You can't imagine Trump saying slippery Starmer. It's a bit long, isn't it? It's a bit long. I mean,
but I think in some ways that would be a more effective attack line than claiming, that he's going to do all these terrible hard left things when he becomes PM. That was the kind of the Blair, attack line, the attack line against Blair, the devil eyes, that behind the mask there's someone really extremist who's going to do terrible things to Britain.
New Labour, new danger.
It's hard to it's hard to make that one land. I think in the case of Starmer, he just doesn't seem very dangerous, does he?
Probably just boring then. Boring Keir Starmer. He's so boring. This is
what does this guy stand for?
Yeah.
What does he stand for?
He doesn't even know. A speech. I almost fell asleep. Yeah.
I mean, even if he said what he stands for, we wouldn't know because we tune out. We'd fall asleep before he got to the point.
The other thing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, drill, baby, drill. So I need to work on my trumpet for when he wins again, assuming they don't rig it. Because unless Jordan Peterson wins the election, I'm in a bit of trouble impressions wise. One last point on this McCarthyism. Well, that's the point. I've just given it away. He said that the Tories were engaging in a kind of weird McCarthyism, which was such a strange hyperbole. And as I said on GB last night, my other point was McCarthy was right. There were communists throughout Hollywood. There were just tons of them. He was right to shut them down. We now see he had a point. How can you say it wasn't filled with communists and that the whole society wasn't in danger of becoming ridiculously far left?
Well, that was another example of gaslighting, which was in some ways even more blatant, because he was effectively accusing the Tories of kind of being guilty of cancelling people. Not Labour, not the woke left. No. It's traditional national conservatives, apparently, who've been going around trying to cancel people, trying to deprive them of their livelihoods because they've spoken out of turn. I mean, that's just like preposterous. I mean, what else? What are you going to accuse, conservatives of next? Being too close to the trade unions. It's like it was like pure projection. Every sin that the woke left are guilty of, he's accusing the Tories of.
Yeah, the Tory party is undertaking a kind of weird McCarthyism, trying to find woke agendas in the very civic institutions they once regarded with respect. It's like they're not trying to find them; they've eventually located some of them that are there. You don't have to look very hard to find woke agendas in the civil service. I mean, and related institutions. It's so absurd. Like you say, it's so absurd. The idea that they're finding them. It's like, I hope they finally found a few of them in their own departments. So annoying, but maybe it's meant to annoy you.
How many kind of woke civil servants have been successfully cancelled by right wing culture warriors? I can't think of any.
No,
You know,
no, it's ridiculous. Stupid Starmer, stupid Starmer. He's so stupid, folks. Could that be it? Just stupid. Like he seems quite stupid, doesn't he?
I think boring Starmer,
Yeah, maybe
slippery
boring. Isn't it?
Starmer. Yeah.
Well, think of it. Let us know if you think of a good nickname to get that Trump would say to Starmer, and you'll win. Well, we don't have merchandise yet, so you'll win nothing. But maybe we should get some merchandise. Okay. All right. Well, I think that's probably enough on Keir Starmer for now. Boring Starmer. Let's have a look at this other story, which was in the Telegraph and many other places last week, which is that Catherine Birbalsingh, aka Britain's strictest head teacher, faces High Court challenge from Muslim pupil over ban enforced at Michaela Community School. I'm sure any listeners to this know all about the Michaela Community School, very known for being disciplinarian, but also known for incredible results. And I'm sure Toby has a lot of insight on that, being a schools expert. But the basic premise is that she's saying all peoples have to sacrifice for the greater good. They have to be vegetarians. They can't have their prayers for their particular religion. Hindus have given up things, she says. Christians have given up things. But now she has an issue that Muslims, or some Muslims, are less willing to give up their prayer time and their prayer mats and their prayer rooms. So that is the issue she's having. And it raises a whole issue about multiculturalism. It's a kind of microcosm of the entire country, which is that can we all integrate, or will some cultures always remain autonomous and separate and refuse to integrate? And is she right to try this, to attempt this? I mean, they only eat vegetarian food in the school, which I found quite strange. And I find it interesting that the idea that it's a place where she says that our school must be a place where children of all races and religions buy into something they all share and that is bigger than themselves, our country. And my critique of this, which I've got in trouble for already with certain liberal friends, is that what does that mean? What can Britain mean if stripped of all identifying features? A relatively trivial example is we eat meat generally in Britain. So if you have to give up meat to not offend other people's sensibilities, well, is that Britain? And I would say we're traditionally a Christian country, have been for hundreds of years. Okay, that seems to have gone, especially after the Equality Act and all that. Now everything's just equal. Okay, so you're giving up the religion of this country. The monarch is still the supreme head of the Church of England, whatever it's called. So we are technically a Christian country. So that's already strange to me. So my argument is great results, amazing what Catherine's doing, huge respect. And yes, we're in a practical world. We've had mass immigration. We're in a different country now. She's doing her best with what she's got, and she's doing a very good job, etc. A larger philosophical point that bothers me, though, is this is the problem with liberalism, that everyone becomes the anywhere man, the vague nothing man who's just everything. He eats bland vegetables and has no views because everyone has to sacrifice to fit in with this one blob. What do you think, Toby?
Yeah. Well, let's just briefly talk about the specific issue, which is why Michaela's in the news, and then let's go on to consider what you've just said. So the specific issue, which I think you touched on, is that a Muslim pupil is taking the school to court because the governors of the school have banned all forms of religious worship during the school day. And the reason the governors did this is because Muslim pupils some of them were praying several times a day during the school day. And there is no prayer room in the school, so they were taking off their blazers, putting them down on the playground asphalt and kneeling on them. And in addition, some of the more evangelical Muslim students were trying to press gang others into joining them in prayer and criticizing them for not praying. And there was one particular girl, the girl who's in fact brought this lawsuit against the school, and she's being supported by matrix chambers, and she's getting legal aid, so probably costing the taxpayer several £100,000. She apparently was suspended from the school. It's a big story in the Mail last week. She was suspended from the school last year because she confided in another girl that she wanted to destroy the school. And then when the other girl threatened to dob her in for saying this, she then threatened to stab this girl. Pretty unpleasant. Anyway, so the Muslim prayer issue was becoming a really divisive one in the school. For Catherine, it's really important that the community coheres, that they all rub along together, that they're not divided by different religious beliefs and practices. And that's why, as you say, they serve vegetarian food at lunchtime. They want all the children to eat exactly the same food and not have separate meals. And she has defended this as part of a kind of her vision of how a multicultural Britain works, and she said it's important for her that the children don't divide along religious lines, but unite around a common British identity. And you make the point that, well, if they're eating vegetarian meals, if they're banning all forms of religious worship in the school, in what sense is it British? Are we kind of watering down the kind of idea of Britishness, diluting it so much that it's not really worth defending? I think having visited the school several times, that is a little unfair. On one occasion when I visited, the kids marched into the dining room at lunchtime reciting Rudyard Kipling's "If" from memory. I mean, it was it was a sort of vision of how you, I imagine, Nick, would like every British secondary school to be. I mean, there couldn't have been a kind of better expression of British patriotism than committing "If" to memory and then reciting it out loud as they marched into the dining hall. It was just like, I was blown away. So I do think that there are, and I think they also, they sing Rule Britannia, the national anthem. There are pictures of the Queen, the King now in the school. So I do think that the idea of Britishness, which Catherine wants the school to unite behind, wants to give the pupils a common identity, has not been too diluted. If it encompasses the children memorizing and reciting "If" at regular intervals, then that's good enough for me.
Well, very interesting. I mean, one thing is people keep saying visit the school. Andrew Doyle said to me, "Visit the school first, Nick, before you make the judgment. Visit the school." I'm thinking, can I just show up at the school like random bearded guys just showing up
No.
at the school? I mean, if talking about if
safeguarding issue,
yeah, I thought of the line treat those two imposters just the same. I was thinking that'll just mean me. That'll mean get that guy out with the beard out of the building. So you can't, as a bearded man, you can't just rock up at some. Not that I'm saying I look like a sex offender. Let's be very clear. But if you just rock up at some random school at random, yeah. But I do like. It sounds like I should visit with an official appointment because it sounds like my mind might be changed by this sight of children just spontaneously reciting Kipling. That would be amazing.
That was, and I think
didn't happen at my school. They spontaneously marched in and battered you and called you gay.
I think you will be able to visit. I think you just need to arrange it with the school. Now, if you turn up at the gate and demand to see you around, that could be problematic.
Yeah. Show me the prayer mats.
But one reason for visiting the school, I think, is that one of the most common criticisms of the school, it's described, as you say, as the strictest. She's described as the strictest headmistress in Britain, as the strictest school in Britain. Is that it's kind of there's this sort of North Korean atmosphere, and it's incredibly strict and draconian, and the children drop their rulers, they get into trouble, detentions. But one thing that becomes clear if you visit the school and you spend time, at the back of any classrooms, is that the children seem to really love just how regimented it is, just how, rigid the behavior management systems are. They know where the boundaries are. They know what the rules are. There's no disruption in the class. There's no bullying in the schools. Well, clearly there was in the case of some of these Muslim pupils, but for the most part, very little bullying. The teachers have authority. All the kids sit there at the front of the class, looking up at the teacher, only speaking when they're spoken to, but they seem to really enjoy it. They enthusiastically participate in the lessons. When they ask for hands to go up, all the hands shoot up. I visited a French class, and the enthusiasm with which these kids from a fairly deprived inner city London borough, the enthusiasm with which they were embracing French was it was something to behold. So there's no question it works, and we know from Michaela's results that it works. As you said, if you it had I think the highest progress 8 score in the country last year. That's a pretty good metric to measure how much progress children make at school. So it controls for just how able the kids are when they arrive. So it doesn't just judge the school on results, it judges them according to how much progress kids make, regardless of their starting points. And by that pretty robust measure, Michaela is the most successful school in the country, and it also gets fantastic results. As someone who was involved in the free school movement at a very early stage and actually helped Catherine when she was trying to set up this school, it is I can say hand on heart, it's what I envisaged the ideal free school to be. I mean, it's like seeing your kind of vision of what schools could be, in a perfect world made flesh when you visit the school. It's just you cannot help but be completely bowled over by it.
All right, well, that makes sense. I mean, I was going to say it makes sense why Jordan Peterson cried when he visited, although he does cry a fair amount. But it just seemed like they were reciting "If," and well, I found it so moving, and the infrastructure of the school, and I could totally see that. I mean, so I need to go there and not be grouchy, but I do worry about this vision of multiculturalism because it's different to my vision of what Britain is. I just think it doesn't work. I think we can't just be everything to all people. We have a culture. You can come in, you can join it, you can not. There's always you can go back on a flight that doesn't take off. I mean, because if that's it, that's our country. That's what I believe, and it becomes. Though I think you can have both points, but it becomes to a degree. You can say it's a great school, but also we need to have cultural values reinforced. Although you could say Kipling is one example of that. But if
I suppose the counter argument, Nick, is, and this has been made, I think, against Catherine's policy of banning religious worship in the school and trying to get the kids to unite around this kind of common conception of Britain and Britishness, is that it's a bit like the French model, the French way of dealing with having, large immigrant populations, la cité, whereby all forms of religious worship and iconography are banned in French state schools. Immigrants are expected to integrate and embrace, French. They're supposed to be as patriotic as, the indigenous population, and there is this sort of insistence on embracing this fairly rigid, very traditional conception of French identity, and the problem is that in France, at any rate, has left a lot of migrant populations incredibly alienated. Now, you could say that's to do with other things. It's because they're economically deprived. It's because there's much more ghettoization in French cities with the migrants kind of pushed out to these outer rings, which become kind of lawless zones at the weekend. So it may not be entirely, education policy and la cité, but nevertheless, that more dogmatic approach, it's our way or the highway. If you don't like it, you can bugger off. You have to embrace all these different aspects of our cultural identity. That does seem to have left large swathes of migrants feeling completely alienated and at odds with the French state in France.
Yeah, well, I would put under not my problem, but yes, I can see why that causes social unrest. But the other thing I mentioned there as well is that France is interesting because the speaking of French is an expression of identity in a way that the speaking of English isn't, because we conquered the world and made our language global virtually. Therefore, speaking it doesn't really mean much, and it gets diluted, and it can dilute your culture having such a global language. And so, the idea of speaking English, I was thinking everyone in the Michaela school presumably speaks English, but doesn't really mean anything. Whereas actually, the speaking of French in itself is a nationalistic, patriotic gesture, which is kind of an interesting difference there. But yeah, I mean, look, maybe I'm living in the past. I grew up in a country called England, doesn't exist anymore. We had prayers and we had hymns as automatic. every day in assembly, and in secondary school, very religious assemblies still, maybe not the hymns. And that was just completely normal. And of course, I think that's what England is. But of course, I grew up in the Lakes in the 80s and 90s. It may as well have been it was a different century. It may as well have been about 2 or 3 different centuries ago. I mean, it was a different world. Of course, I just think England is a Christian country. I think we can't give up anything Christian I think it should be Christian stuff in the school, and everyone else has to give up their things, but not Christian. That's how I see it, because I think that's what Britain is. But hey, some people won't like that, and that was not controversial before. That was how we lived for years and years. It was the furniture, so we didn't notice. It wasn't like it wasn't evangelical speeches every morning, but it was prayers, it was hymns. Obviously, now that becomes. Of course, I was in the country. Who knows what they were doing in London at the time? I don't know,
Yeah.
but I just go on.
I'll meet you halfway in that I don't think all schools should have a Christian ethos, but I would definitely defend the right of some schools to have a Christian ethos, faith schools, and to have admissions policies whereby you have to be a member of that particular religious faith in order to come to the school, and that, of course, is very controversial. And I got into a lot of trouble, almost as much trouble when I was defending free schools. I would also get into that argument. And some people would become even more impassioned, attacking me for defending faith schools, thought faith schools were very divisive, thought all schools should be secular. Why should the taxpayer fund schools for these religious minorities? And point out that actually, the religious minorities pay taxes too. But then you run into difficulty. I imagine you might run into difficulty if you were just defending the existence of faith schools, because then you'd have to defend the existence not just of Christian schools, but of Muslim schools as well, of Jewish schools, and so on and so forth. But anyway, I'm a bit more liberal than you, and I think that if Catherine wants her school to have a secular ethos and wants to ban religious worship during the school day, I think that is entirely her prerogative. I think if a school wants to do that, it does. And that's one of the things she said in her own defence, is that she's made that clear to parents when they come and look around the school. Everyone knows the deal when they apply to the school. It's not a religious school, certainly not a Muslim school. So to now demand that they accommodate this minority by creating prayer rooms, allowing them to pray 5 times a day, seems unreasonable. And one other point, which is that which many Muslims have made, actually, is that there's no requirement in the Muslim religion to pray 5 times a day every day. So the Muslims complaining that this is a breach of their religious freedom to stop them from praying during the school day at Michaela, I think are on a pretty thin ice. I talked to my son about this, who's 16, goes to another free school, the one I helped set up. There are, a number of Muslim pupils in the schools. He told me that no, there is no religious requirement to pray every day, but you are expected to pray at lunchtime on Fridays. I mean, that might be a pretty good compromise, but I think Catherine's a pretty uncompromising sort of person. Yeah, I mean, the other point I've heard made is that it's all very well to say you ban all kinds of religious worship, but banning Muslim prayers is nevertheless discriminatory, because how do you ban Christians from praying? They could just sit on a bench and pray silently, whereas if the
not
Muslims
near an
are
abortion
going to
centre,
pray,
but yeah.
No, that's true. I made that point to my son. Is it discriminatory because the ban effectively only bans Muslims, not Christians, because they have to use prayer mats, bow down, point towards Mecca, etc.? And he said, no, it's perfectly acceptable in the Muslim religion for people to pray silently, sitting on a bench, just like Christians. So that's a bogus argument, apparently.
Interesting. Good debate with your son, but a couple of things to pick you up on. We don't have to do too long because we've got so many other things to get through, but you're not really meeting me halfway with faith schools. You're sort of trying to trick me there. I mean, because as you say, you can have faith schools of all stripes. And I found it very strange at a debate, and you were at this as well, where David Aronovich spoke against against faith schools, which I thought, as a Jewish person now, and he can obviously think what he wants, but as a Jewish person now, given all the anti-Semitism in the country, I was kind of surprised at that. I thought you'd want faith schools. But you certainly wouldn't have to have faith schools for every religion. Maybe you'd have to because of the Equalities Act and all this stuff. but you shouldn't have to, is what I'm saying. You don't go to Saudi Arabia and say, well, there should be faith schools of all persuasions here. You go, no, it's a Muslim country. So I say, I know that sounds crazy in the modern day to say we're a Christian country, even though our king monarch is literally that, is the head of the Church of England. And we are a Christian country. We always have been. Now you sound mental saying it. But of course, wouldn't have to have faith schools of all stripes, because Christianity does have a unique place in this country, should have a unique place. I don't say this from an evangelical perspective. I'm not some evangelical. People always think that just because you say you're a Christian, like, oh yeah, I'm not really religious or spiritual like that. They think you're like just constantly in church and pray. It's like, no, we're just all Christians here. You're a Christian, Toby. I am. We're just, whether we foreground it or not, and to the degree we do, is up to us. But that's what this country is. I know people say you can't go back to it, Nick, but that's what I think. The other thing, that said, I'm not going to let the perfect be the enemy of the good, as they say. And my second choice would still be a school like Michaela School, that's still far better than the school I went to, or any number of comprehensives, or probably private schools and public schools. So obviously, it's a great thing. I'm not a complete dick where I'm like, no, it's not like my vision of England and Britain, so I don't care. I'm still impressed by what she's done, of course. And it's idle to sit around as someone who's not done anything in schools and doesn't do anything that useful for society to completely criticize Catherine Burblesing. So I'm not doing that. I'm just making a sort of philosophical or wider cultural point. One other thing I'd say, finally, is that there is an interesting question, though. Let's accept her premise. Then we all give up stuff and we all sacrifice for the greater good, and that and this idea of Britain. And but the question is, can she win the argument? You've outlined the argument there, but can she win the argument against certain aspects of Islam or certain Muslims who feel very strongly about it? Because that is always where the culture loses the argument, because Hindus are like, yeah, fine. Christians are like, yeah, fine. And Muslims are like, nah, bro, we want our prayer mats, we want our prayer rooms. So if she can, she sets a precedent for the entire culture. She becomes a microcosm of Britain, and that you actually, if something's good enough and worth fighting for, such as great school results, great education, you can defeat these kind of arguments. But I'd be amazed if she can, because no one ever has managed to win an argument like this with a strict Muslim. So I'll be amazed, but let's see.
Well, yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see where the High Court comes down. But I think there are strong arguments on both sides. I think it's hard to predict. But I'd be very sorry if the High Court comes down on the side of the girl, and it will seriously undermine Catherine's authority, I think. And I don't know how she'll adjust to that. But one of the things which makes the school work so well is that she is the supreme leader. She has immense, towering authority, and everyone respects her. So for the court to rule against her, though admittedly it was the Board of Governors, not her, but nevertheless, she's become identified with that cause. So yeah, it would be a real blow to her authority, and potentially very destructive of what she's managed to achieve, which is really remarkable.
Yeah, that'd be terrible. But even if the court rules in her favour, will the culture of intimidation at the school that you've alluded to be such that she can't impose it anyway, or continue to impose it? I don't know. I just asked the question. If they get all these death threats and all these kind of things, bomb threats, let's see. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. Hopefully she wins, despite what I said about my Christian points. Okay, well, we've done over now, so I'd say let's go to our occasional section now, which is Across the Pond. People love our little sections, so let's do Across the Pond. And the big one this week is that Ron DeSantis, your guy, has dropped out and endorsed Trump through, I felt, slightly gritted teeth. And he praised Trump, and he said, I've put my endorsement behind Trump, and that was it. It was fairly unambiguous, but it was not a ringing endorsement in the speech, in the tone of it. It was not exactly DeSantis' style, and obviously they've had beef. But and then Trump, in turn, was very nice about DeSantis. He said, and he endorsed me, which was a great guy, and all that kind of thing. He did all the Trump thing. Says it's tough to campaign, led a great campaign, blah, blah, all this kind of stuff. Great wife. So he did all that, even though they've had all these differences. So that was interesting. And even Ben Shapiro, who you mentioned earlier, was a sort of hardcore never Trumper in 2016. All these never Trumpers who like DeSantis. He said, yeah, we've got to throw our backing behind Trump now. He's the candidate. So everyone's finally got behind Trump. It was inevitable anyway. I said it ages ago. DeSantis couldn't compete with Trump's charisma and his, most famous person of all time qualities. And he was never going to be able to do it. And I was right. You're probably gutted, Toby. Any comment?
Well, the timing's quite interesting. I'm not totally across this, so this is pure speculation. But do you think Nikki Haley claimed after the result in the Iowa caucuses, that it was now a two-horse race, even though she'd come third and DeSantis had come second. But he's now dropped out, and it really is now a two-horse race. Do you think the reason he dropped out before the New Hampshire primary, which is today as we speak, we don't yet know the result, do you think that was to actually give Nikki Haley a shot at defeating Trump? I mean, he's hedging by endorsing Trump, but maybe he's done a kind of behind-the-scenes deal with Nikki Haley, whereby he's dropped out, and in return, if she actually defeats Trump in due course, she'll make DeSantis her running mate.
Seems unlikely to me. I'm not an expert, but it seems to me far more likely he just saw the writing on the wall. Everyone was posting saying DeSantis has to drop out now, otherwise it's pure selfishness. He would have destroyed his career in the Republican Party if he hadn't done the decent thing and realized now, okay, time's up for me. Throw my weight behind Trump. Otherwise, he'd have just damaged his future reputation as a kind of petulant some person who's against the Republican Party. I think isn't that enough of an explanation? Occam's razor style.
Probably. One interesting thing about DeSantis's failure, does it have kind of broader implications for how the anti-woke in the culture war go about prosecuting political campaigns in future? Because one of the differences between DeSantis and Trump is that DeSantis was a new kind of populist. He was all in against woke. He went to war with Disney. He stopped critical race theory and gender identity ideology being taught in public schools in Florida. He foregrounded. He leaned into those issues. He embraced the culture war, and that was central to his whole platform. Trump, he's certainly not, woke by any stretch of the imagination, but nevertheless, he foregrounds more traditional populist political causes. He's protectionist. He wants to, do what he can for the less well-off. He wants to work with trade unions. He's a kind of more conventional, firebrand populist, embracing conventional populist causes and foregrounding those things in his kind of agenda, his platform. Is the implication that leaning into the culture war is never going to really set the electorate on fire? That's not going to work. It's not going to help right of centre candidates win electoral battles. And maybe there's a lesson there for Rishi, and he should actually, follow Keir Starmer's advice and lean out of the culture war and try and, fight the next election on, more conventional grounds. What do you think?
It's interesting, but I disagree with your conclusions because to me, Trump is a culture war candidate in himself. He's just a walking wrecking ball of the culture war. Everything about Trump, everything he says is a huge culture war statement. His very existence is a kind of culture war statement. They're always trying to put him in jail with all these indictments. The media goes crazy over him. They didn't think he could win in 2016, then he did, and it broke everything. He's like Brexit, isn't he? Just Trump in himself is a sort of one-man culture war, or a one-man rebuke to the culture war, perhaps. And although DeSantis was better on perhaps on actually legislating against wokeness, I don't think you can draw that conclusion because Trump is the more controversial figure in the culture war still, even though he was not great on vaccines and lockdowns. Even though he hasn't been that effective when actually in power on some of these things, because he's flawed and he gets people who like him and he hires the neocons and he hires all the wrong people. Even despite that, the sort of image of Trump the sort of not simulacrum, but they kind of just the image, the avatar of Trump is just so. Even the silhouette of Trump, the famous silhouette, Trump himself is just so synonymous with the revolt against the sort of neoliberal globalist elite, even despite his background, despite everything, strangely. So that I don't think you can draw that conclusion from it. I think it's all to do with Trump being the massive personality, massive fame. You just can't compete with that. DeSantis didn't have that factor. He also had these strange aspect of his influencers, the DeSantis influencers online, who seemed to be kind of mean, spiteful, kind of annoying, cringe boomers. and they just didn't get it right. They alienated Republicans and alienated people. It was just a disastrous campaign from the start. You look at the Twitter Spaces that went wrong. They changed all Twitter Spaces, changed all the tech because it went so badly. It was meant to be this big thing he launches with Musk, and it was an absolute cock up. So it just didn't go right for DeSantis on these intangibles, these kind of personality things and just luck based things. Whereas Trump has the Trump magic, doesn't he? And it just goes well for him. Not in all cases, not in 2020, and he lost his magic a bit there. But it's just he just couldn't defeat Trump's meme magic or something. That's more my argument. What do you think?
Yeah. I suppose. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously impossible to draw any definitive conclusions about whether leaning into these culture war issues is electorally sensible or not. I mean, Vivek Ramaswamy lent even more into the culture wars than DeSantis, and his campaign never really caught fire either. What do you think?
He did pretty well. They did
What do
better
you
than
think?
expected.
It did better than expected, yeah.
And what culture war issues would cause Trump a problem? If Trump said, we're going to fix the economy, we're doing all that, we're fixing the border, we're drilling baby drill, and also women are women, there's no downside. Maybe the only argument I could give you is that the abortion issue maybe has cost Trump a little bit, or the Republicans a little bit in general, because of the changes in those laws. I could maybe see that argument a little bit. But is that a culture war issue? That's
Yeah.
such a fundamental moral issue. I don't
No,
know.
I mean, I suppose one issue that I thought would play better for DeSantis was that, and the reason I like him is that he got the pandemic largely right, whereas Trump got it broadly wrong. Florida was one of the first states to come out of lockdown. Trump, embraced the lockdown policy. And I felt that, and that's become a kind of culture war issue in America in a way it hasn't here. So, people's attitude towards the lockdown policy is very much aligns with their political affiliation, how they're going to vote, whereas it doesn't here. And I hope that would play better for DeSantis, and that would be, and that could then become a really big issue in the presidential if it was him against Biden or Newsom. That could be the issue. You could maybe debate the merits of the lockdown policy and make it absolutely crystal clear that it was a disastrous, catastrophic error, and make it less likely that we'll repeat it in future. So that was kind of what I was hoping for, kind of that would be one of the key issues in the battle for the next presidency. But that's not going to happen now because people just don't seem to care that much about that issue. They just want to put it behind them.
Yeah. And the big question is now what happens with Trump and Haley? And, Vivek was saying for a while, the establishment wants to make it a two-horse race between Trump and Haley. Then they want to take out Trump with lawfare or other means. And this, of course, is a concern. Then you end up with Haley by default. I mean, you could see that happening. You could see a weird coup. I mean, we've had it here where we got, Sunak somehow that no one voted for. You could have somehow Haley gets in. They take Trump out. Do they take him out with lawfare? Do they assassinate him? Somehow he gets taken out. I mean, I posted this. I was surprised that even Dan Wootton retweeted this. I was quite surprised at, but I just pointed out the only way I said DeSantis drops out and endorses Trump through slightly gritted teeth. Nothing can stop Trump now except the weaponization of the justice system and the intelligence agencies or assassination. So they could still take him out in some way, and we'd get stuck with Nikki Haley, which would be completely awful. And on that topic, Nikki Haley made the news this week for claiming that she was a victim of racism growing up, and she totally understood racism, and she really understood the horrors of slavery, which is so bad you don't need to mention it all the time because everyone knows it's the worst thing ever. And which, of course, I'm not saying slavery is good, by the way, guys, but it was just, if you watch her interview, it was kind of annoyingly pandering. But she said she was teased every day for being brown in the South, and then, of course, this led to widespread ridicule because she doesn't really look brown. Her name is Nikki Haley, which she has changed from an Indian-sounding name, but no one really knew until recently that Nikki Haley was not white, let's be honest. Yeah. So she may well have experienced that kind of racism in the South, where they did say she was brown. It could well have happened, probably did, but it just sounded a bit silly.
Yeah, there was a funny comment on X beneath the post of her saying this in an NBC News interview. Someone said, Nikki Haley is hands down the whitest brown person I have ever seen. And I looked her up on Wikipedia because I didn't know about her Indian heritage before I saw this clip. And it turns out that both her parents were Indians. And I think they were, they were migrants to the United States. But she doesn't look Indian, does she? And either she's been using a lot of kind of skin lightening cream, or she was just born to a kind of such an elevated cadre of the Brahmin class that she's practically white anyway. But yeah, it seemed an odd thing to say, but it sounds like, actually, if you look it up, she can legitimately claim to be Indian.
Well, I don't want to
Or
get
of
too
Indian
much
heritage.
into the details of her skin. It could get a bit weird, but do you think she had a Michael Jackson sort of incident, like
Maybe.
on the Pepsi commercial? And that was his back. What was it? A skin condition? So he had to become whiter and whiter. Maybe she had a Michael Jackson-esque skin condition. But yeah, I knew she was Indian only because, similar reason to you, a while ago there was a joke about Indians or something on the stage, and it was like a Vivek joke and Nikki Haley, and I thought, what's that about? So I had to check it, and that's when I learned she was actually totally Indian as well. But yeah, with her name, and does she have her husband's surname, and then Nikki, you just don't put it together.
Mm.
And yeah, but she's Indian. But maybe she did experience racism. Who am I to doubt her lived experience? But it was just funny. And now we're going to have the ultimate neocon. He just doesn't know what she believes. Neolib, neocon, nothing Nikki. Nothing Nikki. I've just made that one up. But we don't know what she thinks. She's just a total corporate nonsense establishment, which DeSantis said in his endorsement of Trump. He's like, we can't go back to the corporate nonsense of Nikki Haley. We have to go forward with Trump. I mean, that would be the worst, wouldn't it? Do you see a coup where they somehow put Haley in place? Because Haley and Biden, that's kind of all right, then slightly different, but that's the establishment having its way either way, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's unlikely that she'll, uh, defeat Trump to become the Republican
Well, she
nominee.
won't legitimately, but do you think they'll take Trump out in some way to stop it happening?
That doesn't look like that any of the things that have been tried or that are being tried are likely to be successful. Just seems to make him stronger and stronger.
So they'll just rig the
But it's
election.
possible. But I think more likely is that there'll be an effort to persuade Trump to take her on as his vice presidential candidate. Apparently, Steve Bannon is leading the jihad, I think his word, to stop the Trump taking her on, naming her as his running mate. I think they, according to Bannon, the kind of Republican establishment plan is to install her as vice president, and then just hope that kind of Trump's lack of interest in the detail of day-to-day governing, his kind of his own kind of mental decay, will mean that she's effectively in charge, even though he's nominally still the president.
Interesting. He was asked about it in a clip I just saw yesterday. Trump, who the VP is, he said, "You know what?" And he said, "The funny thing about that is, it doesn't really matter." He says, "It doesn't really matter." He says, "I'll go with a choice. It won't be that surprising." He basically he's going to go with a conventional person. People they speculated Tim Scott and others, but he said it's not going to be surprising and it doesn't make any difference. So he's playing it down. So it's not going to be your Tucker Carlson. It's not going to be your Vivek. It's going to be someone
Mm.
boring. Hopefully not Haley, but maybe someone just sort of vaguely boring and pro-Trump. Haley would be controversial in another way. So I think maybe it's just going to be someone, Tim Scott, or someone just you haven't really thought of much.
I think, yeah, he doesn't poll particularly well with women. I think he polls well with married women, less well with single women. So maybe that could be an incentive for picking her as his
What
running mate.
Haley? Well, you could also pick Kristi Noem. There's a list of other women you could pick.
That's true.
Carrie Lake
That's true.
is a good choice. Although the way he was talking, it even sounded like it wouldn't be Carrie Lake because he was talking. He was really playing it down to. He said it's someone you already know and it's not a big deal. So someone
Maybe it's is it Eleanor Stefaniak?
that's another possibility. He made
Yeah.
it sound like this is very boring and not relevant, and they don't do anything. That's what he said.
The bookies have her down as the favourite to be the running mate.
It's another good call. I think he wouldn't have really played it down that much if it was going to be Haley. I don't think. I could be wrong. Certainly not. So it sounds like it's not going to be anyone that interesting, is what he was saying. So, which is quite strange. So that's that. Yeah, I think. Look, they probably rigged the election. If they don't, they can cripple Trump with deep state stuff, because last time he struggled to actually get anything done. So there's various ways they can stop Trump without assassinating. But I don't know. Let's see. It's going to be very interesting. Obviously, I'm not saying I'm not spreading conspiracies that Toby would disapprove of, but we disagree on the election, and we don't want to go through all that again. All right. Well, that was across the pond. Now let's do everyone's favorite section. It's peak woke. So Toby, so many peak wokes we could go with, as always. I think the main one I had this week was the trans archdeacon in the Church of England. I'm sure you saw this. Many people said this person was somewhat resembled Alan Carr, the comedian. But we don't want to attack people's appearance on this podcast. But it was very strange to see Church of England's first trans archdeacon. The quote was, "I promised I'd not prioritize being a priest over love." Yeah, don't prioritize being a priest when you're an archdeacon. That would be weird. Prioritize some weird LGBT thing about love is love. So I just said one of Satan's least subtle disguises, which was also not one of my most subtle posts. Did you see that, Toby?
I did, yeah. And I don't know if you saw, but the archdeacon in question, Dr. Rachel Mann, is described as a poet. Like he is a person of many talents, according to Jane Ozanne, who's a gay evangelical Christian and one of the main campaigners for banning conversion therapy. She said, "I'm absolutely thrilled to hear the good news of Rachel's appointment as the new Archdeacon of Salford and Bolton. Rachel is an exceptionally talented priest, and the Church of England is very lucky to have the benefit of her experience as a gifted leader, writer, poet, and broadcaster." So, of course, I Googled Dr. Rachel Mann and poems and found a website that she's obviously created, which has 2 poems by her. And the second one is called The Risen Life. And it seems to be an autobiographical poem about waking up in hospital after you've had your penis chopped off. That's how I read it anyway. Maybe my comprehension skills are somewhat lacking. But the second verse goes, "Not remembering for a second what has happened to you, then feeling out from the inside a kind of shock, shivering down through your forehead, teeth, neck, a fear about what might have been removed." So, and the poem's called "The Risen Life," and I guess that's that has a double meaning in that it's about her new life. She has risen again. Sorry, he has risen again as a woman, having been operated on, and having had his bits removed. But it's also, I guess, a reference to Christ rising again. So there's an implicit comparison here between himself and Jesus Christ, and because he's had a sex op. Anyway, I'll send that to you, Nick. You can enjoy that.
Get back, Satan. I mean, that is just so disturbing. And to compare that, I mean, if people want to mutilate themselves, well, I was going to say it's kind of up to them, but it's not really up to them. It's up to doctors and society and many things, really. But then to compare it to the resurrection is so disgusting. If that's what is happening, and so
well, the poem's called "The Risen Life." I may be misunderstanding it, but it does.
You're going to
seem
think of the risen Lord, aren't you?
Yeah. And it seems to be I mean, I don't know if he has had an operation, but it's definitely written from the point of view of someone waking up in hospital having just had a sex change operation and comparing that person to our Lord Jesus Christ.
Disgusting and disturbing. If that's what's happening, all right. I'm just recovering from that one, Toby. Do you want to do one of your peak works?
I was last week, I think we talked about, or a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the latest series of Jack Reacher, which features an ex-girlfriend or a woman he's long been interested in and who he takes up with in the course of season 2, who, in spite of being quite slight, manages to beat up various kind of enormous muscled baddies. And we talked about how, implausible that is. But at least in Reacher, she's a law enforcement. She's a former soldier, and she's gone into security work. So it's not as implausible as the Juno Temple character in season 5 of Fargo, which I've just come to the end of. Now, the Juno Temple, you may remember, is this extremely slight, small woman who was in Ted Lasso. And she's kind of an up-and-coming actress. She's been in a bunch of stuff, and she's very good, actually, in Fargo. And she plays a battered wife who escapes the clutches of her abusive husband, runs off, takes on a new identity, remarries, has a kid, and then her old life catches up with her. But there are several scenes, in which she is unbelievably skilled at fighting off all these bad guys. I mean, literally an army of bad guys come at her, and she just bats them away like Bruce Lee in Enter the Dragon. And she knows about firearms, she knows about explosives, she knows how to rig a house to create kind of electrical defenses like in Straw Dogs. I mean, she's got this extraordinary kind of sort of special forces skill set. And I thought in the course of the show, I loyally stuck with it. And for the most part, I enjoyed it. But I thought at some point we're going to discover what happened between her, being a battered wife and becoming this kind of killer assassin. There was going to be some kind of explanation. Did she go off on a course somewhere? Did she join some kind of survivalist sect and get trained up in all these skills? No, it's not ever explained. You're supposed to take it for granted that this woman who looks like a 13-year-old boy can somehow beat the living hell out of guys that look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. I mean, it's just totally implausible. And as we discussed when we last talked about this is in its own way dangerous misinformation. And I think Joe Rogan apparently makes this point. But young women will imagine that with enough determination and guts and girl power, they can fend off a predatory male or a rapist or a mugger or a burglar. They're going to get a rude awakening if they try and do that, particularly if, like the Juno Temple character in Fargo season 5, they've had absolutely no training whatsoever.
Yeah, and I've just looked her up, and if the internet is to be believed, she's 5'2". Certainly in pictures, she looks smaller than most women. She couldn't beat up a woman, let alone any man. I mean, this is becoming one of my bugbears, Toby, because I was watching Reacher. I think I may have completed season 2. It's so bad, and there are actually things all across the internet about how bad it is. Reacher season 2 is so bad that I was halfway through what may have been the last episode. It's hard to know because they keep releasing them sort of one at a time on Fridays for some reason. And they were sort of wrapping up, and I noticed there was 20 minutes left. I was like, has this wrapped up, or is there another bit coming? I don't even care because it's that bad. I had it on while writing a Substack piece because it was so bad. There's no point even concentrating on it. It's horrifically bad in all ways. The script is awful, and it's bad in every possible metric. But one thing that's so bad about it is those fight scenes. It's sort of one thing for there's something about them that's particularly bad. Because I was watching one of them, and the 4 of them are there. Reacher, who could beat up most people, a guy who could beat up some people, the Neely, the black asexual character who could possibly beat up some people. She's quite big, probably not most men. Then the other woman who's just a completely normal, small woman who in her 30s or something, or 40 or something, who couldn't beat up anyone at all, ever. And what they do, so as soon as that scene starts, it's a completely pointless scene because unless they're just going to randomly kill off that character in a random scuffle, which is not going to happen. She's a major character. She's going to have to die if she dies in a more exciting way. And probably, most likely, she's not going to die. So it renders that scene immediately pointless. You kind of know how things are going to go in action films and stuff, but those scenes are immediately pointless because wokeness dictates that the women have to be able to beat these men up. So then Reacher's definitely going to beat them up. None of them are going to be basically harmed in any way. And do you know how they handled it? Reacher beats up about 20 guys. In the meantime, they keep cutting back to the said small, normal woman, like repeatedly, occasionally. And somehow she's still in the same single struggle with one guy. Eventually, she picks up like her heel from her shoe and like stabs him after getting slightly roughed up. You're like, she would have died in seconds. One punch from that guy, one just like, it's over. And how could it have taken the same amount of time for Reacher to be beating up multiple people as her to be in a single struggle? It doesn't even make temporal sense. So just so it renders the whole thing pointless because we know what's going to happen. So there's no tension at all. And it doesn't make temporal or physical sense in any way. I'm furious.
Yeah, but the icing on the cake. I watched the same episode you're talking about now of Jack Reacher. And the icing on the cake was after her scuffle with that bad guy, who, as you say, was 3 or 4 times her size and actually did rough her up a bit. She doesn't have a single blemish on her. Her makeup is perfect. It hasn't got a hair out of place. It's like there was not even a stab.
Wasn't there like tiny marks of like some like dirt or
no? There weren't even. Usually, you get kind of tiny marks, which then miraculously disappear in the next scene. But there weren't even any tiny marks. She was totally unscathed by her fight with this kind of bear of a man. But one of the problems with this kind of the woke capture of television drama is that it robs any drama of any suspense.
That's what I
if
said.
It's a fight between a small woman and an enormous man, you know the woman's going to win. There's no tension there at all. You know that if there's a heterosexual white male as one of who's a central member of the cast, that's the baddie. If the woman is involved in a lesbian relationship, she's going to be the person that figures everything out, in the final scene and nails the killer, the white guy in the corner. I mean, no black character can ever be a baddie. I mean, it's like there's no whodunit. The whole whodunit genre, can't possibly survive the kind of wokeification of television drama. Suspense, mystery. There's no mystery. It's always the heterosexual white guy. He's the villain.
Occasionally they do it, and there is a movie where the black guy's a villain, and I can't say which without giving spoilers on it. So I'm actually not going to, but occasionally they're going to go, oh, the black guy's a villain. It's a little bit like, oh, they've actually done that. But yeah, I know generally you're right. And it's completely ridiculous. And Reacher season 2 disaster. And he keeps saying throughout the season, did I ever tell you you're smart, Neely? And she goes, not nearly enough. And they say it like repeatedly, like 20 times. I'm like, is this just really bad writing? Because there are a few repeated lines throughout the film that are all awful. Or is it just repeatedly we have to keep saying the black woman's amazing? I don't know which, but because it's just an awful series on all fronts. But yeah, tragic really. I don't have time for many people. Go on, Toby.
I was going to say, it used to be that in Hollywood blockbusters, the black techie was a kind of cliched character. There would always be a black guy in the cast, and who was always really good at tech, like Ving Rhames.
Or the guy in Terminator 2 is another one. Yeah.
The guy in Terminator 2, the guy in Die Hard, one of the kind of robbers, is a kind of the black guy. He's great at tech. He operates the computers and whatever. But now the black techie is always a woman, and often a woman who's either a lesbian or non-binary or something of the kind. It's like they have to. It's like it's almost like this like it's they're trying to kind of debunk the idea that only smart heterosexual white guys can excel in tech. They're trying to be more inclusive, broaden the talent pool that tech can draw on by kind of presenting these role models of people they'd like to be in tech, but for the most part aren't. Anyway.
Yeah, it's all over. I have no time for Pete Woke, so we've got time pressures, but basically B-Dales had a ridiculous thing where you could stay in dorms depending on your preferred gender, and saying we treat all our young people as individuals. At B-Dale school, 45 grand a year school, going completely woke, putting people under threat by saying you can choose how you identify, and then you can be in any dorm. Completely disgusting and dangerous. There was a bikini brand where a male model wore a woman's swimsuit, and you get the idea. And Thangam Debonair said some bollocks about white privilege that annoyed me. So those are my Pete Wokes. We don't have time for them.
Well, I've got. I was going to have a go at Killers of the Flower Moon, the new Scorsese film that I watched a couple of nights ago, which is, I think, Scorsese going full woke, jumping the shark. Don't see it. The cellist at Harry and Meghan's wedding has said that he doesn't want to play Rule Britannia at the proms because he doesn't want Rule Britannia to be played at the proms because it makes people like him feel uncomfortable. I don't think he'd be reciting the words of If as he marched into the dining room at Michaela. The FAA's new diversity push, this is the Federal Aviation Authority. So the FAA's new diversity push includes a focus on hiring people with quote unquote severe intellectual and psychiatric disabilities. That surely is taking equity, diversity and inclusion too far. You want to hire people as air traffic controllers who have severe intellectual and psychiatric disabilities. Air traffic controllers. I mean, I'm never going to fly in America. Again, I'm just saying. And the best one I thought was what's happened to Sports Illustrated. This is a great example of get woke, go broke. So Sports Illustrated, as you may know, has put plus. Yeah, it used to be kind of like Playboy bunnies in bikinis, basically in teeny tiny bikinis, and it was a sort of skin mag for people who were too embarrassed to kind of buy stuff off the top shelf, and did very well. But they've decided they've kind of drunk the woke Kool-Aid in the last couple of years, and they've had plus size models on their swimsuit. This is once a year swimsuit issue. They had a plus size model on, then they had a trans model on. Last swimsuit issue, they put a trans model on the cover, and not surprisingly, Nick, Sports Illustrated has now more or less gone bust. Every single member of staff was laid off last week. Sports Illustrated, for all intents and purposes, is no more. Get woke, go broke.
People have said, sorry, not beautiful, which is what Peterson got in so much trouble for. Although the woman he picked actually wasn't that bad. But yeah, absolutely. Go woke, go broke. All right. And that is pretty much Pete Woke for this week.
You're listening to this message because you're not a premium subscriber to the Weekly Sceptic. If you want to hear the rest of this episode, go to basedmedia.org, where you can sign up for ad-free, extended versions of this podcast, the ability to comment on each episode, the opportunity to participate on monthly Zoom calls with Nick and me, free tickets to our live shows, and even have dinner with us. Go to our sign-up page at basedmedia.org to see what's available in our different membership tiers. Premium membership starts for as little as £5 a month. That's basedmedia.org.
And Toby, now do you want to just plug anything? Well, we've plugged basedmedia.org. We've plugged the live show, February 12th. Those are pretty important. I always plug buymeacoffee.com/Nick Dixon. If you want to support me and not Toby, buymeacoffee.com/Nick Dixon. You've got nickdixon.substack.com, where I'm posting constantly now loads of great articles. I'm absolutely bashing them out with a Toby Young-esque vigor. I mean, I did that one on DEI the other day. I've done another one on Carl Benjamin's Alien Ant Farm post. I've done another one on a film. I've got another one in the pipeline. I've got loads. I'm just nickdixon.substack.com. A lot of value now for £5 a month. And of course, basemedia.org. And Toby, anything you want to particularly plug?
But the two things I want to plug are my usual things. The Daily Sceptic. If you enjoy the Daily Sceptic's content, please give the Daily Sceptic £5 a month, and you can comment beneath the line or just make a donation. That's dailyskeptic.org. And the Free Speech Union has just relaunched its website. It's got a new all singing, all dancing website. It's a big improvement on what was there before. It's very slick, very professional. Go check it out. It's freespeechunion.org. And if by some miracle, some oversight, you're not already a member, please join. For the kind of support you get if you get into trouble, it'll be the best money you've ever spent. So that's it. dailyskeptic.org, freespeechunion.org.
And now basedmedia.org, where you can get the review section. You can find out insights about Toby we didn't put in the free version, and you can get all our future content. And even if you just want to support us for now, just as a gesture, you can just sling us a £5 a month, and just for all this blooming free content you got for a year. So basedmedia.org is the place to go. And I think that is it. So until next week, stay skeptical.
Stay skeptical.